Cornelius Castoriadis' The Imaginary Institution of Society, originally published in French in 1975 as L'Institution Imaginaire de la Société, is one of the most ambitious and original works of 20th century political and social thought. Combining philosophy, psychoanalysis, political theory, and sociology, Castoriadis sets out to develop a radical critique of inherited notions of society, history, and autonomy. He challenges both structuralism and Marxism, arguing instead for a vision of society as a self-instituting, creative process grounded in the radical imagination. Background and intellectual context. Castoriadis, 1922 to 1997, was a Greek-French philosopher, economist, and psychoanalyst, co-founder of the revolutionary group Socialisme ou Barbarie, and later a practicing psychoanalyst influenced by Freud and Lacan. By the time he wrote The Imaginary Institution of Society, Castoriadis had become deeply disillusioned with the orthodox Marxist tradition, particularly its economic determinism and rigid historical materialism. His critique emerged during a period of intellectual ferment in France, alongside the rise of structuralism and post-structuralism, Foucault, Derrida, Althusser, which he also challenged. While those thinkers emphasized structures, signs, and language systems, Castoriadis reasserted the importance of human creativity and the social historical dimension of meaning-making. Central thesis: society as a product of the radical imaginary. At the heart of the imaginary institution of society lies Castoriadis' radical claim. Society is not determined by fixed laws, biological, economic, or linguistic, but is rather constituted by an imaginary process of social creation. By imaginary, Castoriadis does not mean illusory or false, but rather the fundamental capacity of humans to create meanings, institutions, and symbolic forms that are not reducible to necessity. This imaginary dimension is radical in the sense that it is the ground of all social life. Human beings, unlike animals, are not merely subject to instinct or utility. They possess the capacity to create symbols, norms, and worldviews that define what counts as real, true, just, and desirable. These creations are not derived from a rational calculation or natural order. They are instituted. For Castoriadis, this capacity to institute society is autonomous and open-ended. It is not governed by a logic of determinism or functional necessity. Thus, contrary to both Marxist teleology and structuralist closure, history becomes a space of contingency, conflict, and creativity. The institution of society. The concept of institution in Castoriadis' work refers not just to formal organizations, such as schools or parliaments, but to the entire framework of norms, values, representations, and practices that give shape to social life. Language, myths, rituals, political regimes, and even time itself are socially instituted. Every society is founded on a fundamental social imaginary significations imaginaire sociales, core ideas and meanings that orient collective life. For instance, modern capitalist society revolves around significations like progress, growth, and rational mastery. Ancient Athens, by contrast, was instituted around ideas such as public debate and civic virtue. These significations cannot be deduced from material conditions or utility. They are created. Castoriadis argues that these social meanings are not simply layered upon a material base. They form the very fabric of society. Therefore, understanding society requires exploring how these imaginary significations arise, stabilize, and sometimes collapse. The critique of Marxism. Castoriadis' critique of Marxism is both theoretical and political. He accuses traditional Marxism of reducing history to the development of productive forces and economic structures. While Marx had moments of brilliance in recognizing class struggle and alienation, Castoriadis argues that Marxism became increasingly deterministic and economistic, stripping human creativity and agency from history. Furthermore, Marxism, especially in its Leninist forms, ended up replicating the very bureaucratic domination it aimed to abolish. The socialist project became subordinated to a rational, historical necessity and the rule of experts. Castoriadis insists that a truly emancipatory politics must be based not on necessity, but on autonomy and self-institution. Autonomy and the project of emancipation. One of the key contributions of the imaginary institution of society is its articulation of autonomy as both an individual and collective project. Autonomy is not a given. It must be constantly created and maintained through conscious reflection, deliberation, and self-limitation. Castoriadis contrasts autonomous societies, those that recognize their self-instituting nature and encourage collective questioning, with heteronymous societies, which attribute their institutions to external authorities like gods, nature, or historical laws. Ancient Athens and modern democratic movements represent, for him, moments of relative autonomy, while most of history has been marked by heteronomy. Autonomy requires that a society understand itself as the source of its own laws and meanings. This is not a call for arbitrary subjectivism, but for reflective, participatory self-creation. For Castoriadis, democracy is the political form of autonomy, and it must be radically participatory, not just representative. The role of the unconscious in psychoanalysis. A striking aspect of Castoriadis' work is his integration of psychoanalysis into political and social theory. Drawing from Freud, he explores how the psyche is shaped by and shapes social institutions. The unconscious is not isolated from the social world. It is profoundly marked by the symbolic structures and significations of society. Yet Castoriadis parts ways with Freud on several points. He rejects Freud's biological determinism and insists on the role of the imaginary in psychic development. The psyche, like society, has a radical imaginary dimension, a creative, non-rational core that resists full rationalization. This connection between the psyche and the social helps explain why institutions persist even when they are oppressive. They are internalized at an unconscious level. But it also explains how change is possible, because the psyche can also resist, subvert, and reimagine the dominant significations. Time, history, and creation. Castoriadis' conception of time is crucial to his philosophical project. He distinguishes between ensitic time, linear, causal, predictable, and historical time, open-ended, creative, discontinuous. Social historical time is not merely the unfolding of necessity. It is punctuated by rupture and innovation. History for Castoriadis is the space of creation, not merely evolution or progress. It is a field where new forms can emerge, where inherited meanings can be questioned and transformed. This understanding of time and creation opens a space for human freedom and political action. Legacy and influence. Though Castoriadis remains somewhat marginal within mainstream academia, his ideas have had a lasting influence across disciplines, from political theory and philosophy to psychoanalysis and cultural studies. His critique of determinism, defense of autonomy, and emphasis on imagination inspired radical democratic movements, especially in post-1968 Europe. He also anticipated many debates that would become central in later decades: the constructed nature of social reality, the role of discourse and symbolism, the limits of rationalism, and the importance of subjective agency. Thinkers such as Ernesto Laclau, Chantal Mouffe, and Claude Lefort drew upon his insights, while social movements searching for participatory and pluralistic forms of democracy found in Castoriadis a powerful voice. Conclusion. The Imaginary Institution of Society is not an easy book. It is dense, philosophical, and often abstract. But its message is profound and urgent, that society is not something given or determined. It is something we create and can recreate together. Against fatalism and authoritarianism, Castoriadis calls for a reawakening of the radical imaginary and the project of autonomy. In a time when democratic institutions are in crisis and technocratic governance seems to dominate, Castoriadis' vision offers a reminder that another form of society is possible, one where people consciously institute their world and take responsibility for it. His work is an invitation to imagine and to act,